afternoon. Welcome to the Oilfield Strong presentation. We're very happy to have Commissioner Jim Wright as our speaker. Elected in 2020 as commissioner, he is no stranger to the oil industry, having started as a young kid in the oil industry, but then growing into having his own environmental services company down in South Texas. Also a fifth generation cattleman, very knowledgeable about South Texas, but then the oil industry as a whole. And as we probably all accept, it's nice to have someone regulating us that actually understands the industry. That's kind of a nice change, Commissioner Wright. So appreciate you doing that.
Well, thank you for having me here today, Grant.
Well, let's jump in and kind of just start with a good softball type question of kind of if you would give an update on kind of what's happening at the commission with the legislature, kind of what happened at the last session, but what do you see going forward? And then we'll get into some specifics about flaring and takeaway and some things like that.
Last session, I did not see a lot of things as we saw in the 87th session. We had a Senate bill referred to as Senate Bill 3 in the 87th, as I think everybody is aware of, that dealt with weatherization of our assets in the oil and gas industry as it related to delivering fuel for electrical generation. That was a big session for us. The 88th hasn't done a lot of things. There's been some things that's come out of that, such as the creation of a hydrogen council. We've had some work from Senator Charles Perry, who's now on the ballot, I think, coming up on November 7th to improve some funding for some other water opportunities throughout the state. Those are probably the two biggest things that I've seen that came out of the 88th, in addition to approving our annual budget, which there were some good improvements there in getting us further people to help us here at the agency. Electricity, not so much as again we saw in SB3. That's about the heart of what I saw happen in the 88th.
You mentioned electricity, and this is going a little off script, but since you mentioned it, we had Chairman Darby on, Drew Darby, and he was talking about electrical transmission, especially in the Permian, how I guess the report says there's 4 gigs out there now, and they need to have 17 gigs in about 10 years. But I left that conversation a little depressed because it sounded like there's just not a clear focus on how to get that done. But with the oil field moving so heavy toward electrification, then it seems like we're marching down a path of some issues between having enough electricity to handle all the demand that we have.
Yeah, one of the things I've been kind of proud of, and I think most Texans can see it today, is since our event referred to as Winter Storm Uri back in February of 21, I don't think anybody has gone without electricity because of generation. There's been some hiccups due to took down power lines and vegetative growth that impedes power lines and transformers that are blown up because of the huge pool that's been required on these very hot days. But those are more, I think, what we've seen through history. That's always kind of going to occur, but we have not seen where we've exceeded what our requirements on our megawatts are, and I think that's been due to a lot of the things that we saw coming in the 87th with SB3, and one of the things we did at the commission is we started improving our communications with the Public Utilities Commission, which just is 3 floors below me, and I couldn't say before the Winter Storm Uri that I knew any one of them. But I can guarantee you, I know every one of them now.
I bet.
Each other regularly, and from that, we've been able to open up communication, and I think that's been the big key in our success of keeping the electricity on. I know that you had said that Representative Darby had some huge concerns, and we certainly are going to need more as Texas continues to grow. Texas now is I think the last report I saw, we got about 1,000 people a day moving to this state, you know, with all the great opportunities that we have. And of course, with large increases in what you see in our residences and people that are moving here and the industry that's coming, there's more demand for our electricity. And there was in fact, it's a proposition that's out November 7th to have $10 billion available from state funding at a low interest rate to help hopefully promote us putting more dispatchable generation type sources of electricity in the ground. We'll see how that comes out on November 7th, but I do know that we've got to figure out a way to ensure that we have dispatchable electricity to continue Texas moving forward. I'm not real comfortable a lot of times when I see ERCOT putting out reports that we're within just very few thousands of megawatts that could shut down our grid. So I think it's something that we as an agency, we as a state, we need to continue focus on, and we need to continue our improvements with communicating with agencies such as PUC and ERCOT to do that.
So when you look at PUC or PUC and ERCOT, do you have any like definitive steps that need to be taken? I know the communication all, but it's, some transmission, it sounds like adding some generation, but is there kind of the next steps that need to be taken on this, or are we kind of, I guess we'll find out this winter, and obviously Uri was a once in a lifetime type deal, or we hope it was.
Yeah, I'll give you one example of what I think we're in addition to needing more reliable sources of electrical generation. I think we've got to look at the flip side of that too. How do we improve getting that electricity from its generation source to where it's needed? And I think we're seeing some heavy stress in our electrical wiring, our grid system itself.
Yep.
Trying to carry the megawatts that's needed as we grow or continue to grow. I just had a power plant where I'm from down in South Texas the other day, blew one of its larger transformers and put that plant out of commission for 2 weeks, trying to get that transformer repaired and back up because, it's like anything else. If you demand too many amps out of too small a wire, something's going to fail, right?
Yes.
So I think you're going to see that that's going to be the flip side of the issue that we're going to be facing here, and we're kind of already facing here. So it's a double punch approach. We've got to look at what improvements we can do on our grid. We need to look at certainly trying to see where we can curb the actual need for electricity during extreme weather events. Through what manufacturing can slow down and save and those conservative steps that we have taken. But I think that we're going to have to look at how do we spend the money to create that reliable source, deliver that reliable source, and do it in such a way that we do not continue to inflate the price of electricity. And I think there's answers to that. We as political leaders here in the state of Texas need to be smart enough to figure that out. And I think that Representative Darby has had some huge concerns in that, and that's some of the things he's been expressing along with all the other people I've seen down at the Capitol.
Well, you mentioned the word double punching, and one that seems to apply to is the whole issue of flaring, especially in the Permian. That seems like there's been recent reports saying that flaring has increased out there. And then I talked to folks and they're like, well, it's flaring's increasing because midstream doesn't have the takeaway or doesn't have the backup of additional compression. And then I go, well, but if they don't have the takeaway, then why are you drilling and generating that flaring? So it's kind of a back and forth. How do you come out on that? What, is flaring in your mind coming back to becoming an issue again? It seemed like it had resolved. And then what is the problem between midstream versus operators?
Well, I think we got to look at what's happened here in just the past 3 years as far as the oil and gas industry. When we look at the percentage of flaring, it wasn't very many years ago that we were in the 5-6% level of gas that we produced being flared. And just here as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, that went down to as low as 0.5%.
Yep.
I think we continue to see that our industry is looking more at how do we utilize that gas? And that all goes back to what is the market dictating? And we've seen good sustainable improvements in the market. I think that's helped our flaring a lot. And we've also seen operators now take a stronger look at what is my drilling program going to be? And that drilling program has to include the takeaway portion of that. And I think there's a lot of emphasis being placed on that. You may be seeing some higher levels of flaring today, but if you relate that to how fast we're trying to put production out there to capture the market opportunities that we have today, not just domestically, but throughout the world, I think we're still doing a great job at keeping that percentage very, very low. I feel like as we move forward and everybody has a consciousness of not wanting to waste those natural resources or any greenhouse gas emission concerns that they have there, that we'll continue to improve. And hopefully we'll get one day where we're not flaring very much at all, only during those times when we have upsets. And I've seen that happening since I've come to office since 2021.
And no, I think you're right that we've really, as an industry, done so much better and drastically decrease it. One of my little hot button issues is it just doesn't seem like we let the world know about it. We try to keep all those things secrets. And then the environmental advocacy folks are more than happy to tell their side of the story. So it's I don't know how.
One thing I can't credit our industry on is getting up on the mountain and shouting the positive things that we do. But I tell you, that's been a big push for me since I've got to office to say, look, guys, we need to take all these things that we're doing to improve.
Yes.
The benefits to our economy, the benefits to our environment, all the things that we've taken measures on, and we need to highlight those. We need to highlight those to the world, and we need to get better at doing that.
A lot of the flaring and the greenhouse gas issues, it seems like in the last 6 months, they've really started focusing on the lower capitalized, smaller operator, saying that, those smaller companies, smaller wells make up a huge percentage of the overall number of wells and a pretty decent amount of the flaring, of the emissions, if you will. And so I know there's different efforts to try to help those smaller companies, because you go and try to help, you require those companies to go fix up their combustors or their flares. Well, a 5 barrel a day well, the economics just don't work.
Well,
So
I think that's where we as the industry, and I'm excited to say this, we as the industry, I think, are taking a harder look at what does supply and demand really mean. And today we have got opportunities that I've never seen in the history of this industry before in my lifetime. Given circumstances that we've seen throughout the world, the Ukrainian war and all the conflicts that we see in over in the Middle East, I think we've got a great opportunity right now to put our footprint in what the market is on the world. I think improving that needs to continue to be the focus. And when I say that, if we can get our market to where it's sustainable and we don't experience the peaks and valleys that we've seen throughout history, that you'll see that the little guys, the ones that I feel like are most important to our economy here in Texas, will continue to improve and have the ability to economically improve when it comes to trying to focus on improving what their greenhouse gas emissions are, which sometimes I think that's embellished too, just from people that are anti fossil fuel in general.
yeah, it's just like with some of the changes they're doing with Subpart W and some of the factors. It seems like they're not necessarily using industry standards or kind of true test out in the field. They're coming up with these factors that are really going to challenge the small operator, because it's going to force them into kind of that higher greenhouse gas level. So it's
Grant, as well as I do, it's really important that we let a shoe salesman tell us how to run this industry, and that's what's going on today.
Yeah, it's well, speaking of the kind of the whole federal issue, well, yeah, the federal issues with, you look at COP coming up, so you expect there to be some announcements right before that, and that could be Quad OB, Quad OC, SEC issues, Subpart W, methane tax. And I don't know which one they're going to announce, but I've got to believe that 2 or 3 of them will be announced so that Biden can look strong going over there. What, how does the industry combat that, or Railroad Commission kind of help the industry with those federal mandates?
You know,
How about that for an easy question?
well, you know, it's not really that complicated. I think, you know, one of the things I've tried to get us to start realizing more, not just as an agency, but as an industry, is for us to try to start seeing that our actions would probably help dictate what federal actions would be. So I think that if we can start setting our road to destiny, and instead of them trying to figure out what that road needs to look like, would help us a lot going as we move forward in the future. I think improving the way that we do things within the industry without it having great economic harm, and we do that as Texas, and we do that as this agency in this industry, kind of sets the roadway and the pathway for a guy like a shoe salesman that doesn't know anything about it to say, hey, you know, that's not a bad way of doing that. Maybe that's what we ought to adopt and do. So I'm answering all those big questions you had kind of with that. I think you know, at the end of the day, it's important for us to set the road of what needs to be followed, not to allow shoe salesman, which I refer to as shoe salesman as our federal government, to set that pathway for us to follow. So, you know, we've got one coming down in 25 that's going to be a big hurdle for the industry. And I think it's going to be a huge impediment to the littler guys when it comes to our air emission standards that they're wanting us to qualify for. And what's the consequences of not achieving those standards, and what's that costing us for every ton that we're putting out into the atmosphere? That's going to be a big one, you know, and I think that, you know, when I said it when I came into office, we have got to focus on what our flaring intensity is. We've got to make sure that we've got takeaway in part of our drilling program before we start to drill. Otherwise, we're going to get standards like that imposed on us that we have to adapt.
And when you start trying to show the flare intensity and the improvement, it all speaks about data. And that's where environmental advocates will say the industry doesn't have good data. They're not reporting it right. I could also argue, and that might be the case, but I could also argue that some of the information they're getting and taking a FLIR camera and saying that it's that means you're doing X amount of methane or CO2, that's not right either. So how do we end up, you know, where do you think we are from a data standpoint to, are we, so we can really have some proof one way or the other?
You know, there's a ton of technology out in how you gather that data today. One of them you said was, you know, infrared camera, flare intensity type thing. You know, what I don't see is a lot of QA/QC when it comes to utilizing a lot of those newer technological methods of doing that. And, you know, what are you pointing the camera at? You know, there's so many variables that can skew that.
Yep.
And everybody seems to have a different source of how they're trying to quantify what those emission sources are. And you know, I think that until we in Texas, we as an industry really put some thinking behind the quality assurance, quality control of how we're actually going to be measuring that, we're going to have people coming out of the woodwork that say they're experts on it. And it's probably not going to be good for us moving in the future. So do we have a long way to go in technology? I don't think so, as far as measuring that intensity. Do we have to get one way of doing that? Yes, certainly. And we need to make sure that we capitalize and we come up with that way and what that technology is best for us to be measuring that output in.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of these larger companies, larger independents, majors, they have a lot of great technology, a lot of testing. But I don't know if that information is going down to the lower companies. Now, some of that the lower companies just couldn't afford. It's just not appropriate. But there's still quite a bit of good information that could be helpful to these smaller companies. But you know, I talked to a lot of operators. They don't even know that the methane tax is going to exist in 2024. So there's a lack of knowledge out there that's really going to bite some people pretty hard.
You know, I think people need to read more than they read, and they need to understand what it is they read today. Because methane tax is real and it's
Yeah.
coming. And you know, how do we measure that? I don't even think that the federal side of this equation has a good idea on
Yep.
what the liability is. And that's the reason I say you're right. The bigger companies have some great technology out there. Is it economical? I'm not sure. We need to make sure that we come up with something that is economical, that is reliable, that we can go back and say this thing works. This is how you implement it. This is how you use it. This is a result that you get from it, and try to do that in such a way that it's not something that you got to hire a third party company to go out and set up monitors and all of those things that you see written down today. I think that's
Yep.
horrible for the smaller guys.
It just adds LOE to their operation, and most of those wells can't handle any more as it is. So it's speaking of kind of that help, you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, and there's a billion, billion and a half that's supposedly provided to help the less capitalized companies improve. And I know there was an initial slug of money that came out for plugging wells, but it comes kind of with some strings attached, some reporting, and I hear different things about whether the state of Texas will be taking that money because of some of the restrictions and some of the data. Any idea where we are on that? Especially this next little part that I think is supposed to be helping companies with flare intensity and emissions.
Well, if you haven't noticed all the new gray hair that I have, that's been one of the biggest fights that I've been doing, is trying to sit down and talk common sense with the Department of the Interior today on that money that's available from the IRA. And again, there's a lot of things in the IRA that I certainly don't agree with, but
Sure.
one of the parts is, if you're going to make federal funding available to address our orphan well problem that we have, then let's look at what you just said. Let's address the orphan well problem. Let's don't put a lot of things around that cause us to spend a lot of unnecessary tax dollars to accomplish the goal. And that's been my biggest message. And I think that given, my mom and dad used to tell me this all the time: practice what you preach. And what I hear is that the biggest concern is on our greenhouse gas emissions throughout the world, right? And so if you're looking at that and you're concerned about that, then why don't we utilize and capitalize on what you just said? We have an opportunity in the carbon credit market, which I think gives a great benefit to what abandoned and orphan wells are and how they exist today. The problem is I think that we haven't really looked at making those carbon credits real, and who should be the ones buying those carbon credits for us to afford to go out and keep our production domestically going in the direction that we've been going, and have the economic way of paying for that, when the atmosphere just doesn't exist over the United States, it exists over the entire world. And so I think that we should be looking at the carbon credit market and trying to educate our federal partners on the benefits that could provide for us, in making sure that we are responsible when it comes to abandoning or orphaning these wells, and that they are not continue to be a taxpayer's burden. I think that's the answer. But I've had DOI come back and tell me that they won't allow, if we utilize their money to plug these orphan wells, they won't allow us to even consider the carbon credit market, which makes no sense to me whatsoever.
What's the rationale for that?
Well,
Because it seems like why they could work together.
what I've heard unwritten, and I've heard them say verbally, is that they don't want to encourage those that are emitting greenhouse gas emissions to buy obtainable carbon credits that they know would be coming from the orphan well program. And my response to that has been, yeah, but the atmosphere, again, is not just over the United States. If I even asked this question to one of my federal partners. I said, which two countries really rely on their economic success and trade with us here in the United States? And the answer was India and China. I said, okay, which two countries really have no greenhouse gas emission program whatsoever? Which two countries should really be buying these carbon credits from us if they want to continue to trade with us? You know, if you guys go back up to Washington, I would encourage you guys to start talking about that instead of just flat saying, nope, we're not going to allow the carbon credit market on these Ark and Well programs. You know, that's why I said earlier, my hair is turning gray, because I argue with them constantly in that regard. You know, I think there's an opportunity there, and it goes back to practice what you're preaching. If you're concerned about greenhouse gas emissions, then good, let's do something about it. If you're wanting to abolish the oil and gas industry, you're doing it the right way.
Well, and I think there's quite a few folks out there that think that that might be the absolute goal of that. So, but that's a whole nother conversation. But now so you talked about federal money for the orphan wells and plugging. This next tranche of Inflation Reduction is supposed to be for emissions control and helping with equipment and support like that. So what I've heard is that will not have all the restrictions as the initial tranche that was focused on orphan wells.
If I'm understanding your question correctly, you're talking about the methane emissions reduction plan?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, MERP, and this is where I go back to, you know, it's really apparent that the federal government agencies don't necessarily know what the right and left hand's doing, right? You've got the DOI, which is over the orphan well program, saying we can't use carbon credits, and then you got the DOE that's under the methane emissions reduction program that's saying, yeah, we will let you use the carbon credit program. That's just one example of what we have to deal with, and it seems like, you know, again, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. So what that's done right now, and wherever everybody kind of finds themselves, is we're in a really bad point of uncertainty. What is the future going to be when you keep changing your mind ever so often on how to interpret what a statute like the IRA really says?
Well, we're right at the end of our time, but wanted to give you a chance to either, if there's something that we should be paying attention to that's going to either help us or bite us in the butt that we're not even aware of, you're in a position to kind of see what might be coming down the pipe. Is there anything that you can give us a forecast on?
Yeah, you know, I'd like to just reiterate that how important I believe Texas is in setting the example of what we should be doing, and just general concerns when it comes to fossil fuels. And I think that we've got to stand up and show that we are responsible and that we can set the pathway and roadways forward, and that maybe people should be looking at Texas a little bit harder, since I think we're the biggest experts in the world when it comes to producing oil and gas. And we have a little bit of experience in that. So maybe paying closer attention to how we set those examples may tend to lead people to make the right decisions. And for us, as far as how important oil and gas is to us and our livelihoods today, I mean, I don't know of one thing that I can point to today that would give me the same livelihood that I've enjoyed for many a year now without the use of fossil fuels. I'm not saying that we may not get there one day in technology, but we're not there yet. So, you know, my concern again is what does a pathway look like for us with certainty moving forward, and how does that pathway help control cost to the consumer, and how does it benefit Texas the most? That if I had to say anything, that's the three areas that we've got to stay focused in.
I think those are great points to finish with. Commissioner Wright, again, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your service and trying to protect and enhance the oil industry, and look forward to hearing from you in the years to come.
Same
Thank
here.
you, sir.